And today we are going to do a two-part class on making beads out of not clay, not glass, but something very easy to get hold of. Paper. Colored paper, patterned paper. And if you do it right, it doesn't even look like paper anymore. It can look really, really good. And some of you should have some kits with colored paper, with some of them with sheets, some of them with strips. Okay, we're going to start with plain paper today. Plain but colored. And we're going to make some paper beads together. Something like, here's one. Oops, right here. Something like this. Okay, it's got 3 colors on it, 3 different pieces of paper. And here's another one that I did, 3 different colors. And then I did one, I had some patterned paper that I used to make this one. And I started this bead, it has 2 colors, but today we're going to add a couple of more to it. Okay, now the number one thing about making paper beads is that the shape of the paper you use and how long the paper you use determines the shape of the bead. So I gave you in your kits a paper with templates, different shapes, so that you can trace strips of paper for your beads. And I'm going to go through them one by one. And what we'll do today is you can cut out your templates, and I will show you how to use a couple of them, how to shape a couple of them into beads, and how to coat them at the end so that they look less like paper and more like clay or ceramic or glass. And this is what you're going to need. You're going to need colored paper. Patterned paper is okay. You can use wrapping paper. You can use, I used paper from this gift bag. I used some postcards like these with different patterns on them. So anything that's colorful and interesting will do. The only thing you should be careful of is use paper that's pretty stiff, like postcards are. The paper in your kits is stiff paper because it will roll into a bead more easily. It won't crease as easily, and it'll last longer. So you're going to need, like I said, colored paper, or if you have patterned paper, that's fine. You're going to have your sheet with templates on it to cut out. And you're also going to need a skewer or a shish kebab stick, as I call them. You can use a pen, but then the bead hole will be bigger. If you want your bead hole to be smaller, you might want to use something like this. You can use a knitting needle, anything very long and skinny like that. You'll need scissors. You will need glue, or actually I'm using glue sticks for this, but regular glue is okay. And to finish off the bead, you'll need, I use clear nail polish. If you have Mod Podge, that's fine. Any kind of, anything that will give it a clear coating. All right, so all of these things you'll need to start. So we're gonna take our template sheet, and we're going to start out by cutting out the easiest one. It is a very plain strip of paper, just like this. All right, so I want you to cut this one out. Then I want you to cut out the two at the end, I didn't even cut these out yet. At the end I left also a plain strip, but you're going to cut it into 3 parts. Okay, cut out that plain strip, and then even at the end, a very skinny strip. All right, so let's cut those 3 out first. I already cut out my plain strip, and we're going to cut out the other 2. And what these do is, if you use different colors or different patterns, you can make a layered bead like this one, like I showed you, like that. And you see, if you look at the hole here, I used a straw. Nice big hole there, all right? But for this one, I used the skewer, smaller hole. So let's cut out, we're gonna have our long strip here, and then a skinnier strip that we cut out at the end from our template sheet. And then this part we can cut into 3 parts, cut on the line. 2 of them are going to be the same size, one's going to be a little longer, but it doesn't really matter as long as they're those shapes. All right. And the skinny one in the end, actually, we can even take that and make it, let's say make it even skinnier. Because if you are layering paper, each one has to be skinnier than the other, otherwise the one color might be completely covered up. All right, so now we have this very skinny strip here, and they're all cut out, okay? And let's put the others aside for now. So now you have a template, and now you can take one of your sheets of paper and use it to trace a pattern. So let's do that. I have some paper here. I'm going to trace. And even if you don't have templates, if you remember that all you need most of the time are just long strips of paper, that will be almost enough. The other thing you'll need to know, which we'll get to later, is you will also need these long triangles, but we will get to that in a bit. So here I go, I used my template to draw a strip. I'm going to cut it out, and then I'm going to use the other templates that I cut out to make skinnier strips with different colors. And what I suggest here is you could stop the video until you've had all of those cut out. Okay, so now I've got and make sure they're very even. I need that a little uneven there. So make sure they're as even as you can make them. Okay, and now I've got a skinnier strip here. You can see if you hold it against this one, there's room. And now I'm going to use yet one more color to make the last strips. Okay. And the longer the strip you have, the wider the bead is going to be. So, these that you cut out with your template, they're good for layering another color, but if you still want that bead to be wider, then use a longer strip. Okay, so for example, I'm going to use this template. I'm going to make let's use purple here. I'm going to make a short one just so I can add a little more color, but I'm not really going to make the bead much thicker doing that. Okay, so keep cutting then, and in the end you're going to have something like this, and they get progressively skinnier, and you have 4 colors. Okay, so we're going to make a bead that has the 4 colors here. All right, so stop the video until you've cut out your 4 colors with your templates. And when you're ready to start again, we're going to need our skewer and the glue stick and our strips to start. Okay, now we're back, and we're going to take our thickest strip, and we're going to take some glue and put some glue close to the bottom, like that. And we're going to take our skewer and we're going to try to roll it very, very tightly. See how tight I got that curl? Roll it around until you've started to wrap the strip around the skewer knitting needle. Okay, now this is the part where it gets tough, and it's really, really important that you do this right. You always want to keep the strip even as you're wrapping it around. Okay, you want the edges even. And you also want to keep it as tight as you can. So if you start to roll it and it's not tight enough, just keep, again, if you're using thick paper, it won't rip. Just pull on the paper until it is very, very tight around it. And don't worry, it will come off. Even though there's glue there, it'll still come off. Okay, and keep rolling it. Okay, so now I've rolled it part of the way, and it's going to stick. And you see, I'm still sliding it around, even though it's tight. I'm still able to slide it around. So then, as you roll it some more, add a little more glue in the middle, and keep rolling it. And remember, keep it very tight and very even. Okay, so now I've done about gone 2/3 of the way, and I'm getting to this very, very thick tube here. All right, and then I'm going to glue the last part, go all the way to the end. And I'm still pulling, I'm still making sure it's even. And I'm going to keep pulling and rolling and pulling and rolling until I have reached the end of the strip. And we have a cylinder. Okay. And then hold it down a couple minutes, make sure the end is glued on. Okay, and then you've got your first layer. So then we're going to take our second one, which was, let's see, I think I had, here it is. Okay, I've got some lavender here, and I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to start gluing on the end of it to the exact middle, as close as you can get to the middle of the existing cylinder, right here. And I'm pulling hard because I want it to be tight around that first layer of bead. And I'm also looking at it carefully to make sure that the paper lines up evenly. Okay. And I'm going to do the exact same thing. Okay. Glue a little bit, roll a little bit, glue a little, roll a little. Okay. You don't have to glue the entire paper, just enough so that it stays. And again, if you feel like it's not tight enough, pull it back a little bit. I just did that. I just pulled it back because the glue's not dry yet. And I rewrapped it until I felt it was tighter. And I'm working on keeping it as even as I can. Until I have this second layer wrapped. And I'm going to glue the very end of it, make sure that sticks well. Okay, and now we've got 2 layers right there. All right, now we're going to go for our third. Now our third one, again, you can make it longer, but sometimes it's easier to just, or maybe you just have a small strip of paper. You don't have a really long strip of paper, but you still want to add another color. So that can happen a lot. This is great for using scrap paper because you can use skinny pieces, you can use shorter pieces, longer pieces. Like I said, the longer it is, the wider it is, but if you just want to add a little color, this will do. So let's put some glue at the end of this, and we're going to put it in the middle, line it up in the middle of, as close as we can. See there, I got it in the middle. Okay, and we're going to wrap that one around. Making sure it's glued enough and it's even. And so now we have our third layer. We didn't make it much thicker this way, but we did add a third color. And there we go. And now we're going to take our fourth color, which is very skinny, and we're going to do the same thing. And this will make it a little thicker around the middle because it is a long strip. Get some glue on it on the end. Line it up as close as you can to the middle. And we've got that wrapped around once, and we're going to keep going and going. Keep it tight though, just like the others. You always want to, it'll look better and more even if it is wound tightly. And when your glue isn't quite dry, you can always unwind it a bit. And here we go, wrapping it around. I'm pulling it pretty hard here because I want to keep it tight. There we go. Almost at the end. I'm going to make sure there's enough glue at the end to seal it. And now we've got 4 colors. This is pretty cool because, as it turns out, I think if I have a little bit of scrap paper left and I make a really, really, really skinny strip, we can add a 5th color. So Let's try that. Take one of the scraps of paper you have. I'm going to take a bright green. And I'm going to make a very, not even that long. I'm going to make a very, very, very skinny strip right here at the very edge. And anytime you're doing some kind of craft, you're going to wind up with these skinny strips of paper. This is a very good use for them. So I'm even going to cut this little, doesn't have to be that long. And let's see, let's hold, what you want to do, if you're just guessing, you want to hold it against your middle color and make sure it's not too wide. And I still think this is a little bit too wide, so I'm going to cut even more from this. Maybe cut it in half so that our final strip will not cover the one before it. Okay, let's try that. You tell me. So I'm going to hold it against the blue. Yeah, looks like it works. Okay, so we're going to do the last thing with that last strip. We're going to put some glue in the beginning, wrap it tightly and evenly around the last strip. Okay, there I've glued on one end. There. Oops, it's a little to the side. I took it off because it didn't look even to me. The glue isn't dry yet, so you can do that. I'm going to put it back on, make sure it's even. And make it go around. Around, around, around. Make sure the end is well glued until I've reached the end of the strip. And then hold it down for a few minutes so that the end stays. Okay. So I wound up with a bead with 5 colors on it. Pretty cool. Okay. Now I'm going to put this aside for a moment so I can show you another one of the templates. Okay, this template is a very simple triangle. Now, if you don't have templates and you don't even remember any unusual shapes or anything like that, just think a very long triangle. Because most of the time when people make plain cylindrical or what they call Saturn-shaped beads, if you use a triangle, you're going to wind up with a shape kind of like this, kind of like we just did, even if you're using one piece of paper. So we're going to make one more bead today using the triangle template. And what you can do is you can take one of the plain strips of paper and use your template to make a long triangle. Or if you have patterned paper, like I had an old gift bag that I took apart and I used that. But I'm going to start, since we all have our colored strips of paper. Let's take a long one. I have a dark green one right here. Okay, so I'm going to trace a long triangle on here. And then I'm going to cut that out. So if you are busy cutting, and stop the tape right here until you have your template, your long triangle template cut out, and your strip of paper. So there, I've used my template, I've drawn a long triangle, now I'm going to cut it out. Okay, there you go, now we have it. And we're going to do the same thing with this as we did with that long plain strip. But when you're using a shape that has a skinnier top and a wider bottom, you need to start with a wider part when you're wrapping it around the stick. So I'm going to take my bead off now for a moment, the skewer, and I'm going to use it to wrap this bead. And remember I said about the last one that when you're wrapping it, you want to keep the paper as even as possible. So because you want the end point in the middle of the bead. And if you make it crooked, it's going to wind up somewhere over here. So let's take our glue stick, okay, we'll glue on the bottom, and start wrapping it around. And again, keep tucking it in, make sure it's very, very tight. Even if you have to unroll it and re-roll it, make sure it is tight and even. Okay, so now I've just gotten that first part in and it looks pretty tight and it looks not quite even. Let's try again. Easier if you put it on the table and just roll it a bit until you're happy that it is tight enough and that it will roll in a very even way. Okay, so here we go. All right, I've done that first part. Looks pretty tight and even to me. So now I'm going to take some glue and wrap some more. And as I'm wrapping it, you want to make sure that this point is staying in the middle, okay? If you feel like when you're wrapping it, it's starting to look uneven, that point is starting to point in another direction, unroll it and try again, okay? And you're going to keep doing it until you reach the end. And remember, make sure the end is glued well. And when you reach that end, look, it's still very much in the middle, that point. When you reach that end, again, keep making sure it's tight. When you reach that end, make sure there's enough glue. And hold it at the end so that it sticks. And now we've got nicely shaped bead right there. It's very plain because it's one color. What you can do is make a skinnier triangle with another color, And you can add to that as well. Okay, so shall we try one more color? Let's take blue. And again, we're going to make a very, very skinny triangle. A long, skinny triangle. And that triangle has to be even. That point really has to come up pretty much the same on both sides. Okay, using a ruler might help. I feel like mine's not quite even, but there you go. It looks good enough to me. It's too wide though, because look, it's going to cover most of the green. We don't want that to happen, so I'm going to trim off a little bit triangle this way, but you want to leave it as a triangle. Okay. Trimmed off this side a little, trimmed off that side a little. Again, we're still on a triangle here. Okay, so now you can take that, put the remember it's the wider side that you do first. We're going to put it in the middle of our green bead, our plain green bead, and start wrapping it again tightly, 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 and keeping it centered in the middle of the green bead. And keep pulling so it's tight. And you're going to do the same thing, keeping the point of the triangle in the middle. And adding glue as you go along. And take your time wrapping it. It's important that it be centered, that it be even, and it will look better. Wrapping it, wrapping it, wrapping it. And again, we're getting toward the end of the triangle, the skinny part. And glue that. Some glue on that. And there we go. Now we've given it another color. And there. Make sure it's sticking. Okay. So again, if you use the triangle, even with one color, you can make kind of a rounded bead. It's skinny at the two sides and then rounded in the middle. And even though we have a template here, if you have a really, really long piece of paper, the longer your paper is, the wider it will be in the end. So, you know, this is medium size. It's not that long, it's not that short. But if you made a triangle like this, same shape, but longer, your bead would be wider. Now the last thing I'm going to show you for today's part is what you can do with that same pattern with if you've patterned paper, because this is where it really looks good. And I'm going to take that gift bag and I'm going to cut, I'm going to use my triangle template to cut a piece out. I'm going to trace it and find something, wrapping paper. It could be a colorful picture in a magazine that you don't need anymore. Anything, it could be stationery, anything that is going to have more than one color on it. Because then when you even just do that one plain triangle template, you're going to wind up with a very interesting looking bead, and you won't have to layer it to make it look interesting. I like layering beads like we did in the beginning because a lot of times when I scrap paper, the paper is one color. And then I can make my beads wider too. It's really a great use of scrap paper. So here I've got my gift bag. I've drawn the template, a triangle on there. I'm going to cut it out carefully and evenly. Okay, so there we go. And now we're going to do the same thing. We're going to wrap this bead around. We're going to remember, start at the wide side. And we're using the white part, behind the pattern. Okay, so there we are. I put some glue here. And I'm going to wind it around and around. And again, tight. Same rule applies. Keep it tight, keep it even. Okay. There, I'll turn it around. You can see how tight and even it is. And keep going. Oh, it's starting to feel uneven, so I wound it back a little. And I'm going to add some more glue to the middle. Keep wrapping. And as you can see, because this has blue and silver on it, you're seeing both colors. They make their own pattern as you wrap the bead. Now, if you're wondering how many beads you can make out of paper, well, as many as you want. And I have news for you. These are not just for jewelry. In fact, people used to use old, scraps of paper and cloth to make beads in Victorian times, in the 1800s. And they made a lot of beads, because you know what they used them for? They would take those beads and they would make them into curtains. Now, you can imagine, each curtain must have, 50, 100 beads on it, not each curtain, each strand, and then going all the way across the door. So if you wanted to make a curtain to cover the door just out of beads, it would be a lot of scrap paper and a very long time. But there are uses for beads that are not just about jewelry. In fact, we're going to be doing another project coming up for Earth Day that uses beads, and it's not for jewelry. So, okay, so now I've wrapped it, and you can see, because of the pattern, that both colors are showing now, and it makes for a more interesting bead than just one plain color. Okay, now before we go, we have to coat the beads. Like I said, Mod Podge, nail polish remover, any of these things will keep the beads. It makes them not completely waterproof, but a little bit waterproof, harder to come unglued, harder to fall apart. So what I do is I just keep the bead on the stick, and I add some, and see, it's still not sticking completely. You always go back, make it stick first. Yeah, make sure it's completely stuck even before you put the coating on it. Okay, actually I'm going to put this aside. I'm going to go back to the first bead we did because that is dry now. Okay, and we're going to use, I'm going to multitask here. I'm going to hold this one shut until it dries. I'm going to put this back on the stick, take the nail polish remover, coat the bead, and you know, just get all parts. You'll be able to tell when it covers it because it will look shiny. And again, like I said at the beginning, then it winds up looking less like like paper and more like ceramic or glass, colored glass. It's shinier, it's sturdier. And you can keep it on the stick until it dries. And if you feel like you missed a spot, you can always go back, turn it around. Okay, so now I've done this one. And you can see now it is shiny. That looks good, huh? There we go. That looks really good with the coating. I'm very pleased. And now this one hopefully is dry. And we're going to go back and coat this one. It's a little easier. The bead isn't as thick. It's just one strip of paper instead of 5. There you go. Now that one's coated. And we are done. We are done with them both. But give them a chance, you know, Mod Podge and nail polish remover do take some time to dry. So just like I have a little flower pot here, just something I'm going to just put them across on top of the pot until they dry. And when they do, you just slide them off the skewer and you can do whatever you want with them. You can start one of those curtains. You could make jewelry. You could glue the beads onto something you're making to decorate it. There's really a lot of things you can do with beads in general, not just paper ones. Okay, so next week we'll look at some of the other templates and some of the other shapes and other things you can do with the beads. And enjoy finishing the beads that you make today. And don't get rid of your kits, don't get rid of your paper or your templates, because we're going to use them next week. Bye, everybody.